Hello and welcome to the LLG vlog. I'm Helen McGrath, Executive Director of Policy and Governance at LLG, and I'm joined today by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, everybody.
Now, I certainly hope everyone is okay following Storm Aisha and that those who might have experienced power cuts are soon restored. Local authorities, I know, will be working hard to support their communities so affected. Now, Dennis, what have you been looking at this week for us to discuss?
Well, Helen, my attention this week was drawn to a debate on parliamentary democracy and standards in public life that was held in the House of Lords on the 11th of January. Democracy and standards in public life, of course, are vital at a national and local level. However, increasing levels of toxicity in public and political discourse are deterring people from standing for election and representing their local communities. Of course, in an election year, it is timely that we should examine the options that exist to minimize the impact of these appalling trends. Many politicians face abuse, both online and offline, and this is negatively impacting democracy at both a local and national level. The LGA's Debate Not Hate research shows that this is a growing issue, with half of councillors saying abuse has increased in volume since they were first elected. This is putting people off from standing for election or pushing them to stand down from office, undermining local and national democracy, and risking the loss of a whole generation of talented politicians with valuable skills, experience, and expertise. And there's more. LGA research also indicated that some people are more likely to experience higher volumes of more vitriolic abuse, including women, Black and ethnic minority people, and LGBT people. But what can be done? That's the question, to make candidates and councillors feel that they will be supported and protected from inappropriate levels of abuse, threats, and harassment. But the big question, Helen, what next?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the LGA's Debate Not Hate campaign agenda, they have got a useful toolkit actually that if people aren't aware of. It's on their website, and it talks about the practical things that can be done in relation to minimizing any kind of harassment or abuse or dealing with it when it gets there. So it talks about raising awareness, making sure that the campaign Debate Not Hate and the support of it by the local authorities branded on social media, and that materials are available. It talks about influencing locally and in Westminster, so that the Member of Parliament is engaged with and writing to the minister in relation to the concern around Debate Not Hate and actually the real impact that it's having on effective local democracy, and also then responding to abuse, making sure that councils have clear mechanisms, adopted policies which councils can use to monitor and record incidents of harassment and abuse of councillors and officers, of course, because it does happen to officers, and increasingly so as well. And also reaching out to your local police force and making sure that there are good relationships, because there are variants in the way in which certain police forces might approach abuse or harassment or threats when it comes to politicians. So, but I think at the time the report was undertaken, something like 4/5 of councillors had experienced some abuse. But let's not forget, Dennis, this report was back now in 2021. We're in 2024.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, Helen, because my concern is that the perception I have from media reports and so on is that the problem is certainly not going away, that it's getting worse. And as you say, this report from the LGA and the briefing that they did is some time ago, and they did publish this action plan, the sort of areas of priority that they identified, a number of things. But as I say, I'm just concerned that things are getting worse since this report was done. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, it anecdotally it seems to, doesn't it? But I mean, LLG will be issuing out this week our own survey. It's a very, very short survey. It's aimed at monitoring officers. We want to capture the extent to which our monitoring officers have been affected by abuse, intimidation, threats. But we also want them to tell us about circumstances of abuse against their own councillors and their authorities. So it's a really quick survey, and it's really going to help us move forward to support this agenda.
I think you're right. I think this is a very timely thing for LLG to do, if you don't mind me saying so, because this is a time of all times to share ideas ahead of the forthcoming local elections and, of course, the general election. 2024, from the commentators I've seen, they're all anticipating all sorts of challenges and difficulties, both online and offline.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that the LGA are really pushing for is a change in the Localism Act, and this concerns withholding councillors' residential addresses, because they say that that will go some way to protecting them, and that councillors obviously are increasingly worried about individuals knowing where they live. So, I mean, from our point of view, from LLG's point of view, we would definitely support that. Dennis, what?
Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent idea, and I think it's one that's been promoted and should be promoted. There was another interesting one I spotted on the action plan from the LGA, and I don't know whether any authorities have taken this forward. They talked about the idea of establishing a fund for home and ward surgery security to ensure that councils have access to good advice and appropriate and proportionate security arrangements. I don't know of any authority that's done that in my experience, but again, it'd be interesting to find out what councils are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's the pocket of information that isn't being held at the moment in relation to what authorities are doing, and I think actually there could be really good lessons learned across local authorities in respect of what everybody else is doing to try and protect their councillors and officers. But the interesting thing is, isn't it, when it comes to councillors, you know, there's no duty of care from an employment sense. They're not an employee, and yet surely it's incumbent on councils to ensure that their councillors are safe and can go about the very important business of representing their communities.
Well, I think that's got to be right. I know it isn't an employer-employee situation, but in practical terms, there are duties and duties of care that must be very similar to those that are owed to employees, and that local authorities will have to demonstrate that they do care and have arrangements in place, practical arrangements, to support members in their important work as representatives of their community. But this is a divisive time. We've got many elections ahead of us. I am very concerned about what might happen this year and what local authorities need to do to be prepared for it.
No, I think that's right. And I think the government, if it would move just to make that very small change to enable addresses to be withheld. I do know that there are some authorities which do withhold some councillor addresses on the basis that there's a real and pressing threat, which could be disastrous if the residential address was disclosed and in the public domain. But what I would say about that, though, is that once the councillor's address is out there, once it's on the web and it's moved around and it's copied and it's shared, it's very, very difficult. I mean, it almost actually virtually impossible to properly eradicate it. So any change now is only going to benefit new councillors coming in. But of course, we want to attract new councillors, because if things continue at the moment as they are with the trajectory of abuse, who's going to want to do the job, Dennis?
Well, that is the big worry. I think a lot of talent is being lost, a lot of diversity is lost, and therefore the way in which local government works is going to be missing a whole range of input from important aspects of our society. We've moved on to the internet, of course. Social media companies are not well known for stepping in to deal with social issues. I think social media companies should be stepping forward and looking to see what practical steps they can offer in order to remediate the situation that arises where many politicians face abuse and misinformation online, and misinformation perhaps may be one of the bigger issues in the coming months.
Well, LLG will do this short snap survey, we'll publish our results, and then we'll look to see what it is we might do and how we might work alongside the LGA's campaign, just to ensure a safer space, really. And it'll be also for those officers who are attending the polling stations, in terms of what they might witness there. Although I think the last time there was very, very minor acts of abuse or threats, but it happens every time there's an election somewhere in the country. So there's plenty to think about there, Dennis.
Yeah,
and you can be sure
it
that
is
we're
indeed.
there. Yeah. So we'll guide you through the detail in both the Bulletin and our Grapevine podcast throughout the year, as usual. And on that note, don't forget, you can get coverage of many more of our items from the Bulletin and by listening, of course, to the Grapevine podcast. So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Have a good week.